So now it's time for our speaker, Timur Bublik, and he'll be talking about what happened or what can happen if you're trying to save money in cloud and you end up spending more. So basically, he will be talking about cost cutting in cloud and what can happen if you're trying to save too much, and that's something that I'm very interested because I hope that he will bring the topic of FinOps to us, and I'm really looking forward for his speech.
Thank you. All right, this doesn't work. All right, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I am extremely happy to stand here today between you and the lunch. I will try to make it as fast as possible so that we'll catch up on time. And let's start with this. 60% is the best result so far we've been able to achieve in terms of savings within a year. Now this does sound impressive. And the thing is that the result didn't come without some very expensive mistakes. And today I'm going to tell you the learnings we had over the years of FinOps and cost savings and cloud cost governance. And yeah, I hope you will enjoy this talk. First of all, this particular part is made an assumption that many people here are on AWS, because this one is the only slide that is very AWS specific. Who is not on AWS here or doesn't know anything about it? All right, so bear with me. The rest is going to be more relevant for you because everything else is quite a cloud agnostic. Anyways, when we speak about compute or on AWS, we speak about EC2 instances. Those are typically one of the biggest cost contributors in any AWS bill out there. So you're typically billed on an hourly rate. I think there is a per second billing or something like this. And if you want to reduce your EC2 or compute costs, the easiest way to do so is auto-scaling groups. But the problem is that most of you very likely already use them. So there's not that much to do in order to reduce your costs. Of course, you could tweak your metrics and scale smarter, preheat instances and do other stuff. Or you could even try to optimize your software so that it is more efficient, it requires less CPU and memory, less resources. But there's also a good chance that maybe your software is already quite well optimized, and further refactoring is going to waste a lot of engineering hours and bring maybe 1% extra savings. Then what else could you do? Spot instances. AWS has a lot of extra capacity that is unused, and they are trying to give it away for with a substantial discount, but in a bidding process. So you have to bid for a certain amount of for a certain hourly rate that you're ready to pay for the instance, and you'll get the rights to use the certain instance for a certain amount of time until somebody else will need it or outbid you. Spot instances are pretty great, but only as long as your workloads can actually handle short-term disruptions. And unfortunately, not every service out there is built that way. We still have a lot of old software that is not really stateless and very fragile, where you cannot afford losing it just because somebody outbid you. And sometimes the spot market is simply dry, and the prices are getting so much higher that you are saving maybe 5 to 10%, which is not that attractive compared to what you would get otherwise. What else could you do? If you ask your AWS solution architect or technical account manager, they will almost, I'm really confident, they will tell you, you can buy a reserved instance or a savings plan. It's a good idea. Reserved instances allow you to commit to a certain amount of usage at a discount. And the discount can be 20, 30, 50, 60, sometimes over 70%. You can commit to a certain instance family, meaning that you will not be able to change it. Then you will get a bigger discount, and you'll get the biggest discount if you do that, plus commit to 3 years, plus pay upfront. I think you would get something like 72% discount, which sounds amazing. But hold on a second. 3 years is a long, long time. Instances that we have today are times more performant than those that we had 3 years ago. You could imagine some of them are maybe 3 or 4 times more performant, so you would actually use less CPU and memory if you just ran them on the newest versions. How can you mitigate that? You could try to use convertible arrays, for example. Those will allow you to switch between instance families along the way, but they will give you less discount. Then you have another problem. What if in the next 3 years your company decides you don't want to manage any instances anymore at all? You want to go Lambda functions, you want to go Fargate. Anything happens. And then what can you do to save money on long-term commitments without being locked into a certain instance family or to a certain compute solution? There is a savings plan, which works in a similar way, but there is like a generic savings plan that applies to any instance in this region, or even to any, I think Lambda and Fargate are also covered. So you will basically have every possible change in your future technological plans being covered. But the discount you get is much, much less than 72%. I think it's like, I don't know, 20% or something like this, which is still good, but it's a commitment, so you have to think about it. And the problem is also that we as human beings are also not really great with making accurate predictions, because there's a lot of factors that are changing. We have to count in things like growth plans, or market downturns, or acquisitions and stuff like that. It comes to the point where you, as an individual contributor or an engineering manager, simply cannot make an informed decision on your own whether you should or can commit for 3 years of a certain instance. Moreover, you have to collaborate with your engineering teams. We had a situation where we wanted to cover as much of our compute as possible with reserved instances, and at the same time to utilize them at the maximum, that there was just a little bit of headroom in case something goes wrong. And then we had a situation where our developers were really enthusiastic about cost savings, so they reduced a lot of their usage, and we were barely able to fully utilize our savings plan and reserved instance. And then the same happened to us when we signed up for a 1-year savings plan, thinking that it will roughly cover 90% of our workloads. And then 1 month later, we're selling one of our daughter companies, and now we have 20% less utilization. So what I'm trying to say is that if you're committing to reserved instances or savings plans, you should really carefully, closely work with senior business leadership so that you could make the best decision out there. If this is not possible, because we still have macroeconomic uncertainty, if you want to be really safe, you can still go to another way. You're going to go another way, which is there are reserved instances resellers on the market. Those are the companies that are batch buying all the reserved instances on the market and then giving them away to their customers. And essentially, they also guarantee you that if you don't need it, you just sell them, and then within a couple of days, they'll take it back. No questions asked, no fees or penalties or whatever. They do take a certain percentage of the money saved as their fee, but considering that you get quite substantial amount of savings anyways, and that you're fully flexible, it's a good way. We did that with the company called Heikel, and there are many other options on the market as well. Next one is network costs. Here I'm talking precisely about cross-AZ traffic, because this is such a thing that we are all told there's a gold standard. You should always go 3 AZs on AWS if you're in Frankfurt. You just need to go high availability, as much redundancy as possible. And the problem is that whenever your services are talking to each other across AZs, so let's say if service A in AZ1 speaks to service B, but in this AZ2, then you pay in AWS, I don't remember, 1 or 5 cents per gigabyte, maybe 10 cents per gigabyte. And it gets quite expensive if your workloads are very much traffic intensive. Or, for example, if you're running open source software, if you're running Kafka, or RabbitMQ, so data replication across AZs, it's happening there. And it is quite expensive. If we have big volumes of data being replicated, it's getting really expensive. The good news is that it is relatively easy to mitigate this big cost center. One of them is if you're running on Kubernetes, what you could do is turn on zone awareness so that the pods will prefer to talk to other services within the same zone. Or if we speak about Kafka, you could say, turn on compression so that you just send less data within the network. There's also more adventurous ways on reducing this cross-AZ traffic costs, which is going 2 or even just 1 availability zone. Some of you might think this is kind of dangerous and crazy, but when you really think about it, the last single AZ outage in the Frankfurt region on AWS happened 2021. I think it was like summer, because there was some very hot summer and they had air conditioning problems. And the zone was out for about 3 hours. So if we imagine that that happened every year for roughly 3 hours, that would still mean your availability would be 1 or 2 nines after the comma, which is still fairly good. Now, I'm not telling you just go and do that. What I'm going to tell you is that you should calculate what is the business impact of theoretical outage of 3 hours. And I'm not only speaking about missed revenues or orders, but also intangible impact. Let's say reputation loss, regulations, non-compliance. Those could be expensive. And you should maybe start with less critical services and just make a very, very well-informed, calculated risk decision. And then you should be fine, I hope. The next one is Kubernetes. We at Tier, we run like 99% of everything in Kubernetes. And the problem with Kubernetes is that you don't really get a transparent cost view of workloads running in Kubernetes. You don't know how much each of your services, or even on pod level or daemon set level, are costing you. You just see EC2 cost, you just see EKS cost, if it's AWS, or GKE on Google. But fortunately, there's a lot of companies and open source software that help you to get these insights. For example, they could provide you with reports, the pod level, resource utilization, some recommendations, budgets and taxation, everything. There's so many great features. So we decided that we should invest into that, because if we get transparency into our costs inside of Kubernetes cluster, then we'll be able to act on them faster and on scale. We bought a proprietary solution from a vendor. Was quite expensive, like mid 5 digits, something like this. And then there was the first problem. When we got it, we realized that you need to run quite a lot of workloads to just have this software running. It's not only about collecting the data, it's also about processing the data and modeling it. Data modeling is very compute intensive. And the cost of our Kubernetes cluster ballooned by extra 10 or 15% just to run this software. This is the cost we didn't count in when we were buying it. So we are spending more than we were already expecting. Then there was another problem that it was not scaling that great. So we spent a lot of time tweaking its performance so that we don't overspend, but also keep it stable. A lot of engineering hours lost. But then finally, we have it up and running. What do we do now? We look into the data we got, and we were quite a bit disappointed because we had like hundreds of microservices. Each of them costed us under $100, or 95% of them were costing under $100. And there was a savings potential on each of those microservices of $20, $30. And now think about it. If you want to optimize each of those services, you have to carefully look at the usage pattern. You have to look how was it performing in the past 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or maybe even a couple of months. And then you should roughly think, okay, it looks like on average it was at the CPU level, so maybe I can do that. But also, after you do actually that, you still need to monitor how is it looking, how does it look like. So you still need to invest extra time. And it could be like 30 minutes per service, it could be a couple of hours per service, because some services are more complicated than other ones, and they have more complicated usage pattern. So you can imagine when we speak about a scale of 100 services and even 1 hour, it's 100 human hours that we will spend on optimizing and squeezing out $20 from each of those services. That was a very hard sell to the developer community in our organization to convince them, instead of shipping features that could bring us $1 million, they should tweak the service CPU requests and memory limits so that we could save $20. And then we also had this problem that we wanted to bring this data to senior leadership so that they would know how much each service costs, so that there would be more incentive from them to push on to development teams to be in control of this. But we didn't count in such a thing that for leadership, it's not just enough to know how much a service costs, because for them it's just a number, and it's a relatively small number when you look at them individually. But what they would need is a return of an investment calculated for each of them, and it's not that easy to do that for every service. Some of them are really straightforward. Something generates you 10 million a year, and it's okay. And then you have things like documentation service, which does something about documentation, and nobody knows what exactly, and what is the value of it. So we had this data provided, but we couldn't act on it. Eventually, what I recommend you is not to do this, not to go into and buy the biggest, brightest, best solution on the market, but use something open source. For example, nowadays, OpenCost is pretty good. It allows you to even to get network data, which was not possible when we were buying our solution. Or there are even some proprietary vendors that have free tier, which is kind of good enough. It will provide you maybe 95% visibility, but for free. So maybe it's not worth it going and paying $100,000 for getting this 5% of visibility extra squeezed. And eventually, even AWS has improved, and now they provide, if you enable custom usage report on your organization level, this will also give you per resource cost of inside Kubernetes, even though it will not be accurate unless you will install and manage Prometheus from AWS. But it's a different story. There are ways to get this data cheaper, and you should not assume that if you buy something that it will definitely be completely returned after you get the savings back. And this one is my favorite one. Vendors try to secure their revenue streams by, let's say there are different ways for them to do that. One of them is by locking you in and becoming really sticky. What I'm talking about is that when you want to move away from one vendor to another because the another is cheaper, or if maybe you want to even go to open source, you'll see that very often migrating away is taking a lot of effort and time. You'll have to spend probably weeks or months on this migration, sometimes years. This happens too, if this is a really big organization. And this is the engineering time that could have spent on something like more cost savings in other fields or on generating more money. As an example, for a while we were running Circle CI for our continuous integration, and we were hosting all of our Git repositories in GitHub. And we wanted to have one solution. There was various reasons. One of them was also cost savings. So we decided, let's just go and move to GitLab. Because they have both hosting and they have CI/CD. It's a one-stop DevOps shop. Moving our Git repositories was really easy. I think it took us like half a day. It was really easy. But then moving our pipelines, that was hard. We underestimated how much time and effort it will take to move, for example, our mobile apps pipelines, those that are building our Android and iOS applications, because they're highly customized, also with help of Circle CI architects. They're really great pipelines, very efficient, but translating them one-to-one into GitLab CI, that was hard. And it was a lot of time and effort wasted on that. Another way for vendors to lock you in is by offering you long-term commitments as well. They could say, well, if you commit to 3 years of spending, we'll give you 10% discount. And they're like, well, that doesn't sound that bad. We are planning to use it anyway, so why not? Well, there we come again. We cannot predict the future. We don't know about potential merger acquisitions. And that happened to us, for example, as we have committed to, I think, 2 or 3 years to Datadog. And somewhere in the middle of this period, there was a big macroeconomic downturn, and we had to scale everything down, and we were definitely underutilizing our Datadog license, but we still had to pay the full price that we agreed on. We lost astronomical amounts of money. But then we learned on this mistake, and next time we were negotiating with another provider for our managed Kafka solution, we negotiated that we are declining the offer for committing 3 years. We'll take 1-year commitment with as low utilization as possible. We got tiny discount, 3 or 5%, but then we were so glad because 1 year later we had a merger acquisition and decided to move away from AWS and Kafka towards GCP and PubSub. So we were really glad that we were able to move away from Kafka altogether simply because we didn't commit to something long-term. And I believe it's time for a small summary. There are easy ways to have quite substantial savings in your cloud, but also seemingly easy ways that have a lot of pitfalls. You should really consider talking to senior business leadership when you commit to something, especially if you are in a, let's say, cyclical business that really depends on the market conditions. If you are in consumer staples, maybe you're super stable, or maybe you have really great revenues because maybe you're in banking or something like this. In this case, if you have really predictable usage, really predictable revenue streams because your customers are locked in for years on the contracts, maybe you could commit. Otherwise, you should carefully talk about that with leadership. And I believe that's it. If you have any questions, I guess we still have a couple of minutes. Yes? Okay. Well, I'll come to you.
Thank you. It was a great insights. You didn't use much slides, but there was a lot of information. Good. I want to talk about the commitments you mentioned. So largely what I see is the vendors try to commit for 5 years and they provide 28% discount, so something like that. So you also mentioned that. So this gives, even with the senior leadership team, it gives a wrong message to the people who are using cloud that we move everything to cloud, so we reach this commitment and we get this discount. I don't know, this calculation is somewhere wrong. I saw in multiple places that the intention to save money changes to we move a lot of things to cloud without optimizing it, like the lift and shift or using marketplace. So what is your opinion, or how this, what are the trends you see that to avoid this kind of things? Yeah, it's a broad question, but I just want to.
Yeah, well, if we speak exactly about migrating to the cloud, there are multiple ways of doing that. There are lift and shift. There is a very good. Otherwise, you could also go for a cloud native integration, really refactoring everything. It really depends on. The thing is, it really depends on the business situation of your company. I cannot say that lift and shift is always bad or always good, because there's always situations where the refactoring will just take really, really too much time, and you're really missing on something right now. The cloud by itself could really become costly. I think if you go for, even if you go for lift and shift, you can still keep it reasonable as long as you at least have very good cloud governance. If you have all the transparency for the costs in the place, if you have all resources properly tagged, if you have taxation happening for the users of your services and for the teams, it can still be reasonable in cost. But if you just go YOLO, then yes, it's going to be really bad. There's one question here.
Thanks for your insights. I have a question. You were talking about tools that are able to attribute costs to Kubernetes workloads. Is there any tool you know that can attribute network traffic costs to Kubernetes workloads?
Yeah, actually, I think as of now, like KubeCost does that. OpenCost, which is based on, on which KubeCost is based on, is also doing that. CastAI is doing that. I don't know if Cost and Usage Report and AWS can do that. But yeah, I think nowadays it's quite widespread. Even though, to be honest, we tried KubeCost, we tried CastAI, something doesn't look right. It doesn't look like the costs are properly calculated for us. We decided not to dig into the whys of that. Maybe it would be something like a Istio network somehow obstructing the cost or something like this. But yes, there are things that allow you to do that. There's a question over there. Smells like food, right?
Yeah, but one question more.
Yes, of course.
The AWS actually declining reserved instances. You heard probably now we will left with only saving plans. So reserved instances is in phase of removing.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe another way is to present your on-prem resources to the cloud, maybe some hybrid solutions. So I know EKS has external nodes when you can put your on-premise node to EKS, but it also, you should pay for your own CPU also. Mm-hmm. What do you think about this approach?
Well, I think that generally on-premise infrastructure can be very cost efficient. If you really know what you're doing, you can probably, if you have really good contracts with the vendors and suppliers of your hardware and everything else, it can actually be quite a bit cheaper, but you should always think about the network outbound costs from AWS, because if you're going to have a lot of traffic coming into them or from the rest of the cluster into your on-prem, it could become really expensive. So it really, maybe there are use cases where you could say it makes sense. Maybe if you have like data nodes on-prem, so you're just pulling data from there but not putting there, that could actually work because then you don't pay for the inbound traffic. But if you're pushing something into them, it could be expensive. One more. And one more question.
Thank you. Did you ever try to negotiate directly with AWS, to have a direct contact with AWS, for example, with help of some consultants? Because I have some experience with the Duckbill group, Corey Quinn, probably you know him. So I'm wondering if you have any experience with this or some private offers from AWS.
Yeah, we didn't get I think, truly private offers, but there's a EDP, which is the commitment program they have. It does give you a single digit, at least to us, they gave us something like single digit percentage discount. It's generally good, but it's a commitment again. You have to commit a certain amount, and in the market that we have right now, we decided that it's not worth risking it, and that's why we just went with buying reserved instances from the resellers instead. But yeah, this exists, but it's a commitment again.
Thank you. So I have also some experience with EDP, but yeah, it's also you need to commit to some large sum, and yeah, you need to be just spot on with the spending. Otherwise, it doesn't make any economical sense. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. If you have any more questions, we can talk after or during the lunch. I'm always available, and thank you very much for coming.